here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital. I work specifically in creative communications and outreach, so building community through these really fun events. And if you're not familiar with us, Get Connected is our best-in-class volunteer management software serving thousands of organizations across North America and designed specifically to meet the needs of volunteer managers and their programs. And that is what we care about most here at Get Connected. So today we have a panel discussion on growing your volunteer program by building corporate partnerships. We're going to make sure to talk about the foundation of effective corporate partnerships for your program, the benefits and the challenges of these corporate partnerships, and how to really, think about it and build long-term partnerships that really make a difference. And our panel today, we've got Eleanor Gates. She's a former Get Connected by Galaxy Digital client back when she was the director of Volunteer Houston. And now she's the director of operations and development for Galaxy Digital. So she really brings her experience from the corporate side and also working to develop these types of partnerships for volunteer organizations. And we're thrilled to have her on board with us and also sharing from her experiences. We also have Doss Church today, one of the founders here at Get Connected, and he works with corporations who are working to implement volunteer programs and partner with volunteer organizations. So he brings more than a decade of experience of having these types of conversations and really working to see these partnerships happen. So we're just really excited that you both are with us today. Thank you. And of course, we also have Nate Barnes from our Get Connected Networks team, and he's joining us to manage that chat box where you can ask questions. And again, we're just going to all work together to make this a really uplifting time. Hopefully you'll walk away, even if you learn just one thing or you get one creative idea, I feel like it's time well spent. And so we do want to say again, thank you for spending your very valuable time with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and get those slides up so that we can get started speaking. Probably also take a quick little sip of water. All right. Let's go for it. So here's what we'll cover today. Gaining volunteer support through corporate partnerships. We'll discuss what is a corporate partnership, the benefits and challenges of corporate partnerships for your volunteer program, and how to begin growing your volunteer program by building these corporate partnerships. Please stay to the end for practical how-tos to implement and improve partnership opportunities. So some of us may have already started these partnerships and we maybe want to reevaluate or tweak or hone. Maybe some of us haven't started them yet. I think we're going to talk about some high-level principles that really are going to work for you no matter where you're at in your partnership journey for your program. And the topics we'll be going over are corporate partnerships right for your volunteer program? What are businesses looking for in these volunteerism partnerships? And how can you build a successful corporate partnership framework? You'll hear that word a few times. So here at Get Connected, this is how we define a corporate partnership. It's a mutually beneficial relationship formed between a nonprofit or charitable organization and a for-profit business whose purpose is to pursue a common goal based on the shared values of participating organizations. So really, we define it as making it a win-win-win, right? So your volunteer program is winning and the corporation is also winning by meeting goals. But most of all, your cause is really being impacted for good. And that's an exciting thing to see happen. So this was really fun in doing some research for this to see that 60% of companies are currently offering PTO for volunteerism. Some people are calling this VTO, volunteerism time off, right? And it's expected in the next 2 years that an additional 21% of companies expect to add this to their benefits package. That statistic comes from America's Charities Snapshot Employer Research. And so it's exciting to see that there's these volunteerism hours that are out there in the world. Ready to be served. And truthfully, that's just one way that corporate partnerships can benefit your volunteer program is through volunteerism hours. And I think it's a pretty exciting notion to realize that more employees are really asking this of their employers. And so the companies are meeting that demand of kind of building this into their benefits package and their corporate social responsibility. So Dawes and Eleanor, I'd love to hear you share. I mean, I know this is just one way that we've seen companies value volunteer partnerships. Is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I've actually have a couple of statistics that I'd found that I thought were interesting. I've encountered these and having worked with a lot of corporations that are trying to engage with nonprofits. So that's the angle that I'm coming from. And hearing about their programs, it's fascinating to hear how they're building them, what they're doing and what some of the averages are. So a couple of things that I thought would be interesting to add here would be companies with the volunteer time off, so VTO, they have those programs in place, typically offer between 8 hours on the low end and 40 hours per year of paid time off for volunteerism. So anywhere from a day, a year to a full week, which is interesting. And also the average, so if you kind of look at what the average is, which also I looked up and had heard this prior, but had forgotten, and that is that the average is 20 hours per year. So that's about 2.5 days of volunteering, which is really cool. It just shows the where the mindset is and how things are shifting. This is new. These are new numbers, and they continue to grow. So there's just a real determination among the corporations that have those VTO programs to inspire their employees to give back as far as their time goes. And the reason we see it increasing is because they see it working and they see that this is impacting their employees. It's creating better engagement. Their employees are refreshed when they come back from volunteering, and they think more highly of the company. There's so many stats along those lines I won't get into, but just thought that might add to the conversation.
And I think from kind of coming at it from two different perspectives, from my experience, the majority of my background is actually working in corporate America. And I worked for a company that for every 20 hours that I volunteered, my company would donate $200 to that volunteer organization that I was working with. Aside from, having been given the time to actually go do that volunteering, to then see the company also making that additional outreach and investment in the community was huge. And when you look at an organization that had, 30,000 employees, we're talking about a really significant impact on all of those communities, especially for, all of those folks that were out volunteering. So it was great for me to know just multiple levels of work were going into any of the nonprofits that we were supporting. And then another thing that I actually started picking up on, particularly when I was at Volunteer Houston, was more and more companies were shifting away from parties or going to places like Dave and Buster's for team building experiences. And instead, they started planning afternoons of either coming together in a conference room in their headquarters and doing backpack building drives, or they'd go spend an afternoon at a local community farm working to help improve an area that was known as a food desert. And one of the great things about that was it didn't just involve the employees, but they started involving their families as well. So, a lot of wins kind of all around for everyone, not just in the team building, not just benefiting the nonprofit, but also helping to instill this idea of service into our next generations as well. So, having paid time off for volunteerism is amazing, but there are so many other ways that corporations and different companies are getting more and more involved in their local community.
That's great. To build on that quickly with another little thing I read recently, I read that companies are finding the companies who shift from doing employee mixers, or like the Dave and Buster's example, for instance, they shift from that to doing days or hours of volunteerism where it's a group exercise where they're doing team building. They found that after doing some studies and surveys and spending some time doing this, that it increases employee morale far more to do group volunteerism as a company than it does just to get everybody together and to go out and have drinks. And, you know, that's a great way to relax, but the morale is not boosted in the same way as serving together.
Yep. Nor retention. I think that's another big piece for a lot of employers. I think more and more we're seeing, you know, the general public in their job, they want to work for a company that is involved in their community and giving back to, you know, the soup kitchen that they're seeing, that they pass by on their commute to work every day, and those kinds of things. So it's a lot of different ways that companies can get involved in working with, you know, our single cause nonprofits and really helping to make a difference locally.
Absolutely. I think it's really important too, when approaching these partnerships, to really understand, you know, where these corporations are coming from. And that way, when you know these things, you can really speak to that when you're having these conversations, these building conversations, right? You understand how it benefits them. You understand how it benefits your cause and your program. And so here are some ways that corporate partnerships are really beneficial to you and to your volunteer program and the goals and objectives that you have. Corporate partnerships can really help provide exposure to a wider audience. You could potentially gain a larger number of supporters at one time for events and special projects. And it can often lead to pro bono or skilled volunteers, like, you know, sometimes you know, legal support or marketing support or other sorts of things like that, that could otherwise be more challenging or more expensive to access. And that's an exciting notion of just these variety of ways that, you know, if you have a special project, having a corporate partner come in and be supportive of that, you can really make like a big jump forward. I know that's something that both of you have a lot of experience in. So some of these benefits for your program are just going to be finding new advocates, increased visibility, larger volunteer and donor base, and increased access to funding and resources. Dawson, Eleanor, anything you want to add there or expand upon?
So I think I actually already touched on, you know, we're getting employees involved, not just employees involved, but their families. And then that also leads me to the increased visibility. You're not only expanding that beyond individual employees' little realm, if they're on social media, if the employee or the company is on social media, you have the opportunity to really gain a lot more exposure by tapping into that company's social media network if they align with your values, which they should before you even get down that path. But social media just adds another level of visibility and potentially an audience that you would have never been able to gain exposure to, where even though company employees may be in another part of the country, they may be interested and look for something similar in their own area as well. So again, I think what I said just hit on every single one of these things. But it's, you know, it really does open up that visibility into what you're doing as a nonprofit and showing everyone that it is accessible. It's not a difficult thing to get involved in.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, that's great, Eleanor, and so true. And you know, I look at this list, and there's a lot to say about each one, but I'll focus on number 4 because it takes me back to when we started the company. So we started in 2009, and as we were trying to figure out where to, you know, what kind of software to develop, we knew we wanted to develop a product. We realized we loved working with nonprofits the best. We began working with some United Ways and volunteer centers and listening to them. And one of the things that was happening at the time was these statistics were coming out that were showing, you know, volunteers are so important on so many levels to the community, but they also, for the nonprofit, the individual nonprofit that engages with them, are going to become your, you know, maybe they start out as young volunteers, but eventually they become your donors. And that, you know, those volunteers that spend their time with you are 2.5 times more likely to donate and they give 2.5 times more than those donors that don't volunteer with you. And so hearing that statistic, and we were already getting excited about volunteerism at that time, and what, the possibility of developing some software that would meet some needs there. But that level of importance of developing relationships with your volunteers in that way just really closed us on the idea. And certainly you can see, very easy to relate that story to how that translates into corporate relationships as well.
Absolutely. Eleanor, was there something that you'd like to add there?
I was just going to make a note about the funding and resources. Some companies may not be in a position where they can develop, a long-term partnership, but it's always easy to start with whether or not they could even just donate supplies for a project that you need to have done. I've worked with a hardware company in Houston multiple times where they really couldn't develop much of a program, but they were more than willing to donate paint, other supplies and materials that allowed us to complete projects with other groups of volunteers. So it doesn't always have to be just straight up funding or, helping to pay for any kind of a project in a box. It can also just be donation of supplies to help fulfill the project needs that you have.
I love that, because it really helps get that kind of creative and holistic view of what these partnerships could look like. And you can develop multiple partnerships and they can each be unique, but still moving your impact forward and still making a difference. And it's a unique relationship that you're developing with your organization, your volunteer program, and these other entities out in the world who want to contribute in the ways that they can. And so really, it seems like the challenge is, okay, we've got to find the right fit for your program. And then having a framework for, understanding how these partnerships can work with your program. So like Eleanor and Doss have just both mentioned a variety of different ways that these partnerships can form and look, and really having those conversations where you're able to present and build these relationships and onboard these new partnerships, and allowing them to take on their own sort of unique qualities as they will, and then creating a system for managing these partnerships, right? Because anytime we do something at scale, that provides its own unique challenges. And so that is kind of one of the things that we've heard from a lot of the volunteer leaders that we work with at Get Connected, is that really just having a way of managing, onboarding potentially 100 volunteers at one time or something of that nature. It could be even more. So these are some of the greatest challenges that we've noticed. Is there anything else, Eleanor and Doss, that you'd like to add to this thought of some challenges that you've seen, or to expand on any of these?
We may get into it a little bit later, but one of the first things that I did when really building out the corporate programs that we had at Volunteer Houston was really making sure that we had a way to not just identify companies that we might have a good fit with by doing research online. A lot of companies these days, if they have a strong volunteer or corporate service response, corporate or community social responsibility program, they're going to indicate on their website the primary causes that they try to support. So definitely use the tools that are right in front of you to help find organizations that might be a good fit. But then I think one of the biggest lessons I learned a long time ago in developing all of this was making sure that you clearly, and we get into communication in a minute, making sure that expectations are clearly understood. From the corporate perspective, it's what does the company need in order to show the benefit of their volunteer program? But it's also, how can you then show the benefit of the corporate partnerships that you have as part of your volunteer program as well? So as you mentioned earlier, Court, it's that win-win, and being prepared to demonstrate both of those things for both organizations. Because as you can imagine, executive boards on the corporate side are going to want to be able to see, oh, this is the value we added to our community, not just in hours, but the financial impact. And then on the volunteer side, that corporate program providing the benefit to your nonprofit as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll springboard off of that a little bit and also point to a comment that was made in the chat from Miriam Chan, who was saying something very similar there. Who said, a huge part of becoming a donor, process as a corporation, and she's coming from the corporate side, is being able to demonstrate engagement through volunteering. So your employees are engaging. And if you begin to see that, hey, our employees are really getting behind this nonprofit's work, they're engaged in volunteerism, they're very much care about it, or let's say a set of causes, they're spending a lot of time on those causes, then the company is paying attention. The folks, whether they're in the marketing department or HR department, I've worked with folks in all aspects, who work in all aspects of the company, who also happen to be running the volunteer program, but they're responsible for reporting on volunteer hours. So they begin to see that level of engagement, and they say, hey, we can begin now budgeting some finances to send to these organizations or to these particular causes as a result. So that's, sort of springboarding off of what you said, Eleanor, and finding the right fit. The challenge there is it's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to do a lot of listening and understanding. And I do think that the idea of going to their website and reading about what is important to them is very important. But if you have your eye on a particular partner, or you're just getting to know one, sitting down and listening to them. I heard of a case where multiple cases where surveys were created by you as the nonprofit, shared with the corporate employees, and getting them to fill it out and tell you, so you can learn specifically right from them, from the horse's mouth, what do you care about, what is important to you, and then begin to build something a little more custom around the needs or the whatever is exciting to the corporation, to get them more engaged, to get their employees more impassioned, and eventually maybe to have the corporation get behind that financially.
And just really quick, continuing to bounce off of, sorry, Doss and I could sit here and have this conversation all day long. So thank you for joining us, everyone. In developing the framework, it is not a one size fits all. And some corporate partners are going to want a fully customized program. And so it's thinking through the types of projects that you need done within your nonprofit. And keeping that, if I could have anything I want, this is what I would want. And understanding, okay, what would that need? And then you have an opportunity to present that to the corporate partner. Others may just need a project in a box, where, they want to have an afternoon to do something that they could probably do once a quarter. So it's really making sure that you've thought through all the different types of options that you can offer a corporate partner in supporting their focus on volunteerism. And as Court said earlier, it's also about getting creative and thinking outside of the box as to how you can get them engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that really just leads us right into all these different ways. You're already speaking to it, but all these different ways that corporate partnerships can participate. Feel free to share in the chat some ways that you've had corporate partners or local businesses participate in your program. Maybe some folks will get creative ideas. But employee volunteerism, that's usually number one, right? We talked about that paid time off or volunteer paid time off that a lot of corporations are offering. In-kind donations, special event support, exposure to wider audiences. The social media cross-pollination is big. People love to share, this was our employee volunteerism day. We worked with this organization, and all of a sudden your organization is getting in front of all of that corporation's followers on social media, which could be thousands and thousands of new people in an audience that maybe wouldn't have heard of you before. Larger community footprint. Perhaps this will allow you to expand your program. Again, pro bono or skilled volunteers, dollars for doers grants, which is kind of exciting. I know that you all have some experience with that. I think Eleanor briefly mentioned it earlier. And then also workplace giving. So Doss, I feel like we spoke about this recently, actually.
Yes, yeah, Dollars for Doers and workplace giving. And our experience, I get to speak to that as Galaxy. And when we first began and we're launching our platform, we reached out to our local United Way and developed a relationship with them and some other nonprofits and through them. And they have a well-developed program, workplace giving program that they've used for ages, time out of mind, since the beginning of the United Way. And we invited them in to come and give talks to us once a year, sometimes more, where they would talk to us about the work that they were doing in the local community. And oftentimes they would highlight a specific nonprofit. So I remember the YWCA came in and they gave a talk, and we actually went to their offices. That was convenient for us because it's within walking distance of our office. And we just walked over, got a tour, and learned about what the work they were doing. And I know some folks on the team got involved in doing some volunteerism with them. But the more you learn about those organizations, and the more impassioned you get. Oftentimes, employees have very little awareness as to what the needs are right around their offices. Whether they work in the office or from their home. They may know some of what's going on around them just from listening to the news or reading online, but having a nonprofit come in and speak to you in person and highlight what's really going on right in your backyard is incredibly powerful. And for us as a company, it's been incredibly powerful, and it's caused us to increase our giving as a company each year, and to get more invested in giving back in terms of our time. And so we right off the bat developed a workplace giving program because we saw the benefits and we heard the stories firsthand, and it was empowering and impassioned all of us. So that's maybe just a little bit about our specific experience. I'm sure Eleanor has a ton of experience, and you've worked at different corporate levels, and so take it away, Eleanor, if you've got some some stories to tell.
The problem is I probably have too many stories to tell. But Dawes, I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of employees don't necessarily have a good line of sight as to what may be going on within their communities. So bringing in individual nonprofits and going to that source and helping educate them on, what the needs are, is definitely going to increase your level of engagement. It's also going to offer the employees the opportunity to go, I really respect what they're doing, but that's not a cause I necessarily want to support. But here is one that I do. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things that I have seen a number of companies do lately is they will have an afternoon where they bring in 100 different nonprofits to allow employees to walk around, learn about each one of those nonprofits, and be able to decide what kind of program they might want to become involved in. I think I attended 2 or 3 of those when I was in Houston, and I will tell you, it was not great just for meeting people and introducing them to what all of the nonprofits did, but it was also a great opportunity for me as a nonprofit to network with other nonprofits in my area. And in some ways, we found some of the best projects to do because we were able to partner together, because the company might say, well, we kind of want to do a little bit here, and we also want to do a little bit over here. Well, by partnering with other nonprofits, you can provide a much bigger and better experience potentially to your corporate partners while still sharing in the benefits of that partnership. So that's something that I thought was very, very successful for everybody.
I love that. I love the creativity of that and the working together in the community. The nonprofit that I volunteer for recently sort of started up a couple of partnerships in that same way of partnering with other nonprofits to put their programs sort of together to benefit each other. But then also they were able to attain some funding to actually help support the mission of both. So it was pretty exciting actually to see that happen because we're kind of small and so we're just getting started. So to see something like that happen was just a big deal. All right, so here we go. Will corporate partnerships work for your program? I think there's a strong case that with little creativity and a lot of listening, that the answer could be yes. These conversations are really worth having. So here are some considerations for building winning partnerships, right? Because we don't just want to do whatever, grab whatever. We really want to think about this like could be a long-term relationship, that grows and kind of changes a little bit as time goes on, as your program grows and the company grows as well. So really getting clear and determining what a successful partnership is going to look like for your volunteer program, your organization. Really create and hone your process for building these corporate partnerships because it is a relationship. And then, of course, how are you going to reach out to these potential partners? How are you going to start these conversations? Or how are you going to maybe sort of have new conversations with partners that have already been present, right? So that you could grow the partnership and help grow your program. And implementing a system for specific corporate partner, volunteer opportunities. How are you going to onboard, train, and track this corporate volunteerism in your program, right? Because it presents this challenge of potentially onboarding a lot of new volunteers at one time. Or, as Eleanor spoke to, and Das as well, having really specific projects that are only for corporate partnerships, maybe only for these corporate volunteers and partnerships. So how are you going to handle that? And Das and Eleanor, is there anything you want to add to that consideration list before we kind of move on?
Yeah, I think, I saw here, sorry, I just saw a question here from Laura about create and hone. And I'll speak to that very quickly because I was actually going to already. In creating and honing that and honing what the program looks like, you don't have to start from scratch. There are a lot of nonprofits out there that have built corporate volunteer programs that have multiple levels and tiers of offerings that they can provide to different companies. The one thing they all have is a solid project plan. It's not just checking the box that we have all the materials and supplies for that day, but taking that step back and looking at what are your goals for your corporate volunteer programs, and then working directly with your potential partners to make sure that there is alignment there. It's not just ensuring you align on values, but in terms of what you're hoping to get out of that relationship. And sometimes that's going to look a little different depending on the company that you're working with. But by having that backbone of a project plan, you're going to be able to then implement and tweak based on the experiences that you have with each event that you have with your corporate partner. It took us probably a full year to hone what our corporate volunteer program looked like. And it took taking lessons learned from, that project worked phenomenally well, to that did not work well at all, and figuring out what didn't work and what did, and then continuing to tweak that as well. There are also resources out there. I'm not going to speak to it a whole lot, but I highly encourage folks to also leverage large organizations like the Points of Light network. Points of Light, all of their affiliates have, which are typically volunteer centers, they all have pretty much the same building blocks of corporate volunteer programs within their organizations as well. So it's lessons learned and also tapping into a network you may already have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And part of creating and honing is gathering that feedback, right? So you can gather your own internal feedback, and everyone on the staff, who's been involved in kind of leading a project can say, wow, high five, we did great. That was awesome. But the question, the bit larger question is, well, what was the experience like for the corporate employees, for the corporation? And going back to this idea of a survey, and this was mentioned in the chat earlier, so I'll mention it now as well. We do have examples of an employee survey, just so you know, and Nate had mentioned that in the chat too. So if you, or Court had, so if you'd like to have, and I know Court said that she would share that with everyone, so you can have it afterwards. But those are so important, and it doesn't just happen at the beginning when you're trying to understand, for instance, what causes are important to this company that we're engaging with. But it also happens after events. And if you can gain agreement from your corporate partner to share a survey after you do a day of volunteerism or an afternoon or whatever it is that you end up doing with your company partner, then absolutely send out that survey, gather the data, gather the feedback, and figure out what worked and what didn't. And that is, so you're creating it initially. Sometimes it's you're maybe at the very beginning, it is an out-of-the-box solution, as Court was saying earlier. Maybe it is a little less custom, but over time, the more you learn from your individual corporate partners and the more you're able to survey them and gather feedback, then you can take that feedback and use it to tweak and improve the way that you handle your corporate volunteerism and your projects that you're developing for them. Got a longer story that I think I may be able to squeeze in later, but I'll stop for now and let Court keep us rolling.
Well, I do remember, Doss, you sharing, I feel it was earlier this year, about a corporation you were working with that was implementing volunteer time off as one of their very first thing, and their objective for their first year was just to get 1,000 hours of service. They didn't care, where it came from or what it looked like. They were just like, we want to find local, organizations that our employees are excited to spend this time at, and we just want to hit this number. So that might be a first year objective for a specific partnership, right? So then all you have to do as the volunteer program is just prepare those opportunities. Maybe it's not even a specific event. Maybe these corporate volunteers just come in on the opportunities that you're already offering. And you just have to have a system for onboarding them and kind of getting them into the mix of your normal volunteer program flow. That might be what that partnership looks like year one, right? And then you reassess and you say, what was the engagement, right? How did these employees, kind of integrate into your volunteer pool? Like, how did that work for them? And then you clarify, you grow as time goes on. So the objectives may look different, especially if the business is, very early in their corporate volunteer program. You as the expert on volunteerism may be the one that can really guide them. And so that's where it is really this relationship sort of aspect. Like, okay, this is all you can do this year. Let's make that doable for you. Does that sound spot on to you, Doss? Like what you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to answer that. You did great.
Okay. So we're going to talk about what do these successful corporate partnerships look like? And as we've already determined, they can look like a lot of different things. The programming can be very unique to your program, unique to the company, unique to the partnership, but it has a corporate partnership that's successful has a few qualities that you really want to look for and cultivate and create those qualities, right? Mutually beneficial, making certain there's an alignment of values, and then keeping that communication line open. So I think setting expectations on communication is also really important. So let's talk about that mutually beneficial, which we've already brought up a few times, but being clear on how this partnership works for all involved. Is this contributing to your program in ways that make an impact? Is this partnership meeting the businesses? CSR is corporate social responsibility. So it's very possible that employee volunteerism is just a part of their corporate social responsibility objectives, right? So they might have very specific volunteerism objectives that they'd like to meet. Are the employees engaged in the opportunities? That's really important. And that's where you as volunteer leaders have that expert knowledge on, really engaging your volunteers and just making sure that you're getting those employees into the fold. And is your cause uplifted and your mission move forward? So these are some really important mutually beneficial qualities. Is there anything that you all want to add to that?
I think Nate he was going to highlight
We've got a few questions coming through that I wanted to highlight. Just before we move forward, first of all, when talking about partnerships corporations. Carmela asked, who at the corporation would you approach first? Would it be marketing? Would it be the CEO? Would it be the president? I don't know.
So
That's
this
a tough
could be
question. It's good.
a DOS versus Eleanor, or Eleanor versus DOS answer. I trust her implicitly, so I'm going to be looking forward to hers. But I'll jump in and just say, at all of the companies that I've worked with, there seems to be, I mean, it is oftentimes HR that's really running the volunteer program, but there is a champion within the company that is really driving it. And maybe it is the president, maybe it is the CEO. There's a company that we work with that we've really gotten close with as we've developed a relationship with them, and they're actually using our software for their employee volunteer program. And I know that their employee volunteer program started with a couple of employees who are critical employees, but I'm almost certain they're not executive level. They're passionate about giving back, and they came to their boss, who said, why don't we have an employee volunteer program? And then that boss came to his boss and said, why don't we have an employee volunteer program? So of course, what oftentimes happens whenever you open your mouth in a company, you get put in charge of that project. So she is not an executive, but she is really the driving force behind this company's volunteer program. And there's I think 3,000 or 4,000 employees at this company. So that's, I would say, to start with, I would almost put it back to you and say, it's going to be a little different at every company.
Mhm.
The president is not the one or the CEO is not the one driving the program. Then you just need to ask around a little bit and find out, well, who really is the heartbeat internally of this volunteer program? Could be HR, could be marketing, could be the CEO. And then take the conversation in that direction. But Eleanor, what do you think? What's your experience?
So there are really kind of two different ways. Obviously, with most things, it's either a push or a pull. So one of the first things that we did at Volunteer Houston is we developed what our corporate volunteer program would look like. What were the service offerings that we had? Did we have something where, okay, you can just go see what's available on our website, or we can customize an entire project for you? We put everything out on our website and made it visible to everyone. So we actually had a lot of direct contact and engagement coming to us as employees or HR representatives were searching the internet for volunteer opportunities in their local area. So I think, making sure that you, even if you don't have a formal program, at least indicating that you are welcoming corporate partnerships, making sure that that's out there on your website so that when folks are looking for things to do, they know, oh, great, they're used to working with companies and helping to coordinate those things. Let me go ahead and reach out to them. For our direct outreach, one of the things we actually, DOS had it right, it changes from company to company. Obviously, if a company on their website indicates that they have a CSR program, then that's the group you're going to want to engage with. We then typically looked at reaching out to the HR teams. More often than not, that's where the volunteer programs tend to reside. But at the same time, that's not always accurate. So my third choice that I always seem to reach out to was trying to get a hold of the executive admin or someone that worked directly with one of the C-level people of the company. Really just to kind of, start that conversation. And more often than not, that person will be like, you know what, we definitely need to do this. And then the best part would be when they say, we have a company event coming up. We've been trying to figure out what to do. How can you help us? And then I was ready right then to be able to say, this is exactly what we can do. And it will provide you with better team building opportunity. We can help coordinate the food delivery. We can, make this a great event for your annual company event. So it does vary company to company, but there are definitely some inroads that it's fairly easy to find.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. And I'm loving the questions coming in, especially about, training and onboarding a large number of volunteers. These are the challenges that a lot of the volunteer leaders that we work with Get Connected, our software, were facing. And that's exactly how we responded in the design, was making it easier to onboard large numbers of volunteers, making it easier within our software to actually be able to address the unique needs of creating and maintaining these partnerships. And so we really love to listen to volunteer leaders and the challenges that you face like every single day. And so we saw that this was a need and responded by designing within our software the capability of managing that and making it a lot easier when you take out sort of all of the moving pieces and sort of have it in one system. And so that was how we responded to that issue, and making sure that you could have, it's almost like having another employee helping you to be able to manage these, because the scale of what you could accomplish by building these partnerships, you really need to be having these more important conversations right out there in the community, and investing the time and listening and talking and kind of taking some of the admin off of your plate, because managing a larger scale project like this could really push each of us to our limits, I think, if we didn't have tools that were working on our behalf to help support us in managing these tasks.
Yeah, so
Um,
true. And I would just add to that. I mean, I could talk about our software all day, but I'll just say any volunteer engagement software, any software worth its salt needs to be able to help you with that onboarding process and make it simple. So it should be helping you determine, well, what are these individual employees' interests? What are their favorite causes? And it should be then making recommendations to them, individual recommendations to them based on their interest and favorite causes. And, even which programs are their favorite? Are you a Parks and Rec? If so, then your individual an individual employee, if it was me, then I would be into the kids sports programs, because that's how I grew up. So I'd want to help there. If it's somebody else, they may be interested in the seniors programs or the climbing program. So those are things that you can learn very quickly, and you don't have to have the individual conversation. Your software you can leverage your software to find that out quickly. And then to maybe even mention one other comment that was made, a question that was asked about, well, how do you navigate finding the right corporate partner, and then making sure that you're making the right connections there and delivering something to them that's valuable. Some of it really starts with who you are as a nonprofit and what your resources are, and what you're capable of, what needs you're capable of meeting. Maybe your staff is small, and maybe you don't have a huge amount of energy that you can put into the needs of a specific corporation, or maybe you've got a larger staff and you can really get more custom. And I think that's what it boils down to, highlighting your programs and what you can offer, and listening well to the corporation to find out what their needs are and what their goals are, and then doing your best to meet them within your own limits. We could go on for quite a while on that answer. I'm sure Eleanor and I could, tennis match back and forth on that. But that's my quick response.
And I want to make a really quick comment, because I know a lot of this can feel overwhelming. And you start, I know Court's going to continue going through things, so I'm going to try to make this quick. It can seem like it is too much for a small team to take on. I want to tell you all, it is possible. And you can tap into your existing volunteer network to help support and help you execute on some of these corporate programs. I will tell you, Volunteer Houston, we were a staff of 3 people, and we hosted 4,400 corporate employees for 4.5 hours on one day in 44 different locations. And we were able to do that because we leveraged the volunteers we already worked with and got them to be supplemental staff to help us out for the day. So it can be really overwhelming, but it can be done, and tap into the resources you have, even if they're not your paid resources.
That's really great insight. I think that's one of the things that I always have to remember, like, just ask. just have the conversation and just ask. Sometimes, at least for me, I can just get into my work zone and I've got my head down and I forget to look up and say, I need support to make this big vision happen. And I'm going to talk to 10 or 20 people and ask them to help. And actually what I find when something like that happens is that people bring skill sets that I had no idea they had. They bring enthusiasm that I couldn't have expected, and it can become actually better than I could have ever imagined. And so I do love that that story of what you experienced, Eleanor, being able to leverage the volunteers that you already had to then host an additional pretty large amount of volunteers. I've never been a part of an event that large. But I think that that's incredibly exciting, and it does sort of take away a little bit of the stress and overwhelm, because I know that that's something when we're all just working in our day-to-day that can be really challenging to navigate, the task stress. So I feel like, what you've shared about having a project plan and tapping into networks, resources that exist, like Points of Light has a structure, of these, how to engage in these corporate partnerships. I think these are all really helpful insights. So we'll just keep going. What else do these corporate partnerships look like? We've already spoken about it a number of times, but finding an alignment of values. So big challenge is just really finding that company that truly believes in your mission and sees the mutual value in working together, right? You want to be valued too, and ensure that your potential partner has a mission statement that aligns with your program's values. And if it's a new program, that might be something that they're still developing. And again, you as the organization can really help inform them. So open communication, I would love to hear some of your insights on that from your experience. Setting expectations is important for long-term success, and really scheduling this like regular project planning check-ins and creating, an assessment to say, this is when we're going to talk. It's on the calendar. These are the, the ways that we're going to measure whether or not this has been a success and whether or not we're meeting objectives, and how we can kind of tweak and move forward. Do y'all have anything you'd like to add there on that? Just in keeping the conversation going with these partnerships.
Absolutely. I spoke with, had an initiative that I was working on earlier in the year where I was talking with a lot of nonprofits around the country and asking them how they engage their corporations. And one of the things I heard was regular meetings. So there were, and it depends on, it's not just your resources too, it's also the resources of the company, right? And what their availability is and to meet with you. And some of these meetings can be online, and some of them can even be some kind of email back and forth. But ideally, if you're able to, getting in front of the company. I know there was, I have an example of, keep highlighting the United Way, but that's so many of the stories that I remember from the early days. There's a United Way of Greater Knoxville that had engaged with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So that was their corporate partner, and Oak Ridge had come to them and said, hey, we give a lot of money to the community, and we've got a history of doing that. But we want more volunteerism. How do we do that? And so they came with that problem and just wanted to increase volunteerism. They had no volunteer hours going into the community. And so the United Way sat down with them, and they came up with this plan where they would sit down with the leaders of the volunteer program there within Oak Ridge National Labs. And there was a regular meeting they established that was, I think it was once every other month, I believe. And they would sit and they would listen and find out, what everyone was thinking on staff, what they wanted to do for their next volunteer event. And then they would put a plan in place, and it was on the United Way, the nonprofit in this case, to go back and put the project plan together and then lead that project. And so they were practicing getting together. And sometimes it was an online meeting, and sometimes in person, and listening. And then they put together a plan based on that, and then they executed. They led the days or hours of caring. And it was twofold. It was, okay, the company wants individuals to be impassioned about volunteerism, and they also want groups of employees to get together and do days of volunteerism. So the United Way helped with both. They would share individual volunteer opportunities with the employees and just make it public by sharing links. to their Get Connected site. So the employees suddenly had a feed of opportunities they could get access to. And then they would also put together these kind of group days of caring. And as a result, at the end of, within 2 years, they had gone from 0 hours at the end of a year and a half, they had gone from 0 hours to almost 250 hours from the employees at Oak Ridge of volunteerism. And that was just such a great success story. And it started with listening, understanding what the nonprofit's resources were and how much time they could devote, and then also finding out, well, how serious is this corporation, and are they willing to meet with us now, and establish a regular meeting? And part of those, last thing I'll say is, the end result is you got to have the data and the impact. So being able to go to their volunteer portal that we had provided them in this case, and running a report that showed the impact from these individual days of caring, or even that individual employees were making as they were signing up for opportunities. Bringing those reports to those meetings became a regular thing. They could review those together and see that, hey, we're actually making an impact. Look at how our hours are growing. Look at the specific causes we're addressing as a company. So that kind of creates this momentum because there's excitement, there's engagement, that you're seeing the results of the work that you're doing and the time that you're putting into it. And that provides some motivation to continue spending that time and doing those every other monthly meetings. Your meetings could be quarterly, they could be, every 6 months, whatever you're able to do in terms of gaining agreement from your corporate partner. But that story stood out to me, and hopefully that's helpful to you.
That's brilliant. Let's keep moving because I know we're really close to time, and I'm not sure if folks have to go right at 1, but if we keep talking, we may have to just send you the recording if you do have to go. But I do want to make sure that we get through these last few points, and then we do have a few questions. Eleanor and Dos, do you have a little bit of extra time, or? Okay, thank you. All right, so building your volunteer program, corporate partnership framework, which is a lot of what we are talking about. And then I'll go to the chat box at the end. We'll get through these slides and we'll just start kind of pitching a few of these questions and take just a few minutes on them. All right, so creating volunteer opportunities for corporate partners, beginning outreach to build your relationships and onboard partners, and determine how you'll report on impact. So
Can I make one quick comment on this one, Cora?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you start building your outreach plan, we've talked a lot, we are talking a lot about corporate partnerships here. I'd also encourage our nonprofit folks to reach out to their local conference and tourism board. So a lot of the opportunities that we had that started great corporate partnerships were when we had companies coming into town for a conference and they were looking for an afternoon to do a service project. So highly recommend developing that relationship as well. So it's not just the corporations, but it's also your local tourism and conference board. Always provides a lot of good insight as well. So just a quick thought on that one.
Yeah, and we'll just fly over here the systems for making this work. Having a framework, which we've talked about a lot. Opportunities, right? You have engaging opportunities, and then management tools, which we've spoken about a little bit as well, for managing the partnership, tracking hours, and engaging the corporate volunteers. And the 3 takeaways we'll talk about are just determining how corporate volunteerism fits into your program. Creating your corporate volunteerism framework, and that's going to be unique for your program and the resources that you have, and also the companies that you work with. And then building a relationship through outreach. So these are, I'm going to include in the planning guide, you'll see just a brainstorming. This is really kind of where it takes like that, thinking a little bit outside of the box, like who are some companies that would be aligned with our values, local businesses that could be aligned with our cause, and start imagining what an ideal partnership could look like, and get together with your team or other people at your organization, or if you don't have a team, get together with your top volunteers who are there regularly, so that you can begin cultivating and crafting a framework for this. So if some folks have to go, that's okay, but we're going to take just a couple of extra minutes today to answer some questions, and just want to let you know that if you want to continue to come to our monthly educational series, You can follow us on LinkedIn at Galaxy Digital Volunteer Management. And you can also head to galaxydigital.com to learn to our learning center, where you can check out tons of resources. I'm going to send out links to all of the additional resources that we've mentioned today. And I'm going to make sure that you get that by Monday, and along with the recording and the planning guide, the survey, and the outreach letter template. So you will receive all of that. And if you have questions about Get Connected, our volunteer management software, and how we utilize it to engage volunteers and also build partnerships like this, you can reach out to us at info@galaxydigital.com to learn more about that. And thanks, Nate, for dropping all of that. Now I'm going to just scroll back through and check out the questions. If you've got a question, drop it in the chat, and I'm going to make sure to pitch it real quick here to Eleanor and Das. So we've got one that says, I'm a one-person team volunteer center and having a hard time finding and filling volunteer slots in the community. The community is 20,000 population. Do you or would you suggest going and doing these corporate partnerships to help build volunteer base and fill current opportunities? Currently not getting an active response from general volunteer base. What do y'all think about that? I mean, I think that's a creative idea.
I would say 100%. When I first started at Volunteer Houston, I was a one-person volunteer center. And with roughly 100,000 volunteers in our system, we often also struggled filling things. And so reaching out and working with our corporate partners that were in existence, as well as identifying new ones, that's how we were able to start fulfilling a lot of those volunteer needs that weren't being filled. And then we ultimately saw that transition into having more volunteers from the corporate side than we knew what to do with. And so we were able to start checking things off of that wish list of projects that some of our nonprofit partners had. So 100% understand where you're coming from as a one-person volunteer center. It is great to have creative ideas and finding new partnerships that can help fill those gaps.
Mm-hmm. I won't be able to add anything to what Eleanor was just said, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Just to affirm, yes. I mean, I think find those corporations locally that have a willing population of employees who want to get engaged, and I think that's an excellent approach.
Yeah, I love that. And there's some amazing comments here, helpful ideas in the chat box. I love it, about how to tap into different communities in our community that we might not know about. So Tony had a great idea in there too. Gosh, this is amazing. Okay, let's see. Do we have, oh yeah, so you could check into the recovery community, people who are in recovery within your community that are looking for really, great ways of connecting and engaging in the community and doing good, being a force for good, and also checking senior centers and depending on the type of needs. That's a brilliant, actually, really brilliant idea. I love that. I've noticed.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was good. Go ahead, Das.
Just from my experience, having a teenager that is prepping for college, she's a serious-minded kid, and I would suggest going to schools where you've got teenagers who are really wanting to add to their resume. And so many schools right now are promoting volunteerism as a way to do that. In fact, within my daughter's school, there is a more formal volunteer program, and that is one of the requirements, that there's a certain number of hours that kids have to fill to add to their resume, to their applications, specifically as they prepare for college. So schools, corporations, the recovery community, I think those are all excellent ideas.
And I will say that as a student, I did a lot of volunteer hours. It was a requirement of my middle school and my high school. And it was a requirement to get particular credit hours that were required for graduation. And wouldn't you know it, that led me to a college that, gave me funding because I had been doing so many volunteer hours for 7 years up to that point, that then I continued doing volunteer hours in university as well. So there's a lot of opportunities. And I know that our school had a very formal program for managing volunteerism for the scholars that had to complete a particular amount of hours. So we put in, I think our scholars alone did 240 hours of service a year. It was required. So local schools are an amazing resource. All right, any last questions? I think so far we've only gone 5 minutes over, which I think is pretty great. I want to thank everyone again for taking your precious time and spending it with us. We know how busy you are and how hard you work to really make an impact in your community and really support your cause in every way that you possibly can. We really value you and your time and the efforts that you put in. And want to thank again, Eleanor and Doss for taking time out of their day to come speak to their experience and offer something of value to you as our volunteer leaders whom we care about greatly. And again, we are Get Connected by Galaxy Digital, and we're just so grateful that you were here today. Thank you very much. Please look for an email coming from us on Monday that will have all of these follow-up resources. And that way you can tap back in, because I know it was a lot of information and you'll probably want to go back through and really think through, what's going to be the right next step for you. So yes. Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you next month. Make sure to get on our volunteer management insider list as well, which you can sign up at galaxydigital.com so that you can get emails from us to tell you about our educational series. All right. Anything else you want to say before you say goodbye, Doss and Eleanor?
No.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for joining. And I'll just share a quote that I found recently that I'm surprised I'd never heard, which I loved, which is, "The essence of life is to serve others and to do good." And that was a quote from my good friend Aristotle. So take that and go and do good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Court, for hosting today.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And we'll see you soon. See you next time.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.